now rooting for Boma's power-sharing formula, where President and Prime Minister, both elected by Kenyans, get to share power. But how will we get there? That's a question here on the front page of the Daily Nation. On the Standard, a headline talking about the same thing, but in a different way. Moi Kibaki were listed for Senate. This is on page 13 of the Standard. The Parliamentary Select Committee on Review of the Constitution has been blamed for making drastic changes to experts' proposals in agreement to what is headlining on the Daily Nation, that yes, initially there was a proposal, and Zamba Kitonga, chairperson of that defunct committee of experts, says yes, there was a proposal for that hybrid system where both President and Prime Minister exist together, but that was watered down and changed to the pure presidential system that we are now seeing as a bit problematic. Do you think it is necessary to revisit this debate at this point?
Not at all. It's very clear that Raila Odinga is a self-serving politician. You can recall very well he was one of the champions of the 2010 Constitution. He thought that he would be able to become the president, and he wanted a strong presidency. And therefore, after he have lost, he is now talking of another scheme. So therefore, from where I sit, Raila Odinga should be the last person who should be discussing.
But let's be fair to Raila Odinga, because even when Zamba Kitonga admits that it was down to the 27 members of the Parliamentary Select Committee on the Review of the Constitution who changed all these things, including this proposal, including a proposal initially that was to do away with the Senate. It wasn't a big team that did this. It is a Parliamentary Select Committee on Review. You blame Raila Odinga for that, but are you sure that he is to blame for it, for the watering down of some of these things?
Yes, if you look at the history of the constitution making, during that processes, who are the people who are tussling? Which were the main actors in that transition period? You will see the main actor was Raila Odinga and Moi Kibaki. So this constitution we have, they are the ones who are able to marshal the troops to support this constitution. So it is their philosophy that underpins this constitution. If you recall very well, there was a tussle as to which system is going to be adopted by this constitution. But after the two agreed, the stalemate was then broken. So the point is, what we have is clearly a product of the two gentlemen. And therefore, if any of them was to come and say, no, this system is not good, surely that is not a good politician, is not an honest politician, is a self-serving politician.
Okay. Now,
I would imagine the people who will probably be criticizing this system are those who are in the no campaign. They are the ones who have the moral duty to say, no, we told you this system is not going to work. Yes. But a situation where you are a key proponent of this constitution, you surely you ought not to be talking.
Raila Odinga aside, Jubilee NASA politics aside, now let's look at Kenya and the best system of governance that we could have. We've experienced a pure presidential system. There were proposals, and I'm sure even when these proposals were being fronted, they were to respond to a certain kind of problem that we had foreseen. The proposal to have a prime minister and a president working together. Very different from what we saw in the Grand Coalition government when we had both positions, but something entrenched in the constitution, a prime minister elected by parliament, but working together. Don't you think that it is something to consider, given that there were proposals back then? Right now, TRT MP Kasait Kamket is coming up with the same proposal, and there are those who agree with him that yes, probably that's the way to go. What is your honest opinion, without referring to Raila Odinga or Moi Kibaki?
Well, I do not know as to why they want us to change the system. If at all they want us to change the system so that probably we address the problem of tribalism in this country, I can tell you a parliamentary system is not the cure. And I can give you several examples of other societies which are divided tribally or whatever other cleavages we may talk about, and they have a parliamentary system. A good example is Ethiopia. Currently there is a lot of tribal politics there, tribal violence, but it is a parliamentary system. Another example is Guyana. Another example is Malaysia. In fact, the problem of tribalism is never cured by adopting either a presidential system or what we call a parliamentary system. Because, for instance, if you were to turn into what we call a parliamentary system, if Kikuyus, for instance, want to support a certain party, they will still troop to that party. If the Kalenjin want to support a certain party, because you know the Prime Minister is usually a nominee of a certain party, they will still coalesce behind a certain political party. Number two, there's also even a greater danger, because Prime Ministers usually don't have term limits. For instance, in Germany, we have Merkel. She's now doing almost her 4th term. We have a person like Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore. That guy is a son of a former prime minister who has been a prime minister since, I don't know, 1960 what. He left office in 1990s only to leave that position to his son, and several other jurisdictions. A prime minister does not have a term limit. So, but a presidential system where you find presidents always serve a certain period of time, as opposed to a prime ministerial position where you will see a person who is always being in that position. And finally, and most importantly, you will have a prime minister who is not directly accountable to the people, because a prime minister is usually elected by parliamentarians. So you will have a person who does not connect to the people, a person who acquires that position through bribing and influencing members of parliament, as opposed to this system where the president is directly voted by the people. So from where I sit, I can tell you a parliamentary system is not a cure to the problems that we may be having in this country.
You've just talked about tribalism, but there could be other problems that probably this hybrid system was intended to remedy, away from tribalism. Inclusion, probably. The fact that some communities feel that they will never ascend to these top positions, that probably that was intended to cure that.
Yes, I agree, but I'm saying that is not the cure. Yes, it is not the cure, fine. There's that argument that when you have a prime ministerial position, small communities, because they have a higher representation in parliament, they can as well have a more fairer chance to get into the seat of power. But then again, in such societies, usually the most contested area of the battle of that politics of that society is usually the boundary review. You have what we call gerrymandering. So you have the strongest party ensuring that it is able to get more better seats, more seats in areas that is perceived as strong, and therefore you will still see that dominance continuing, notwithstanding it is a parliamentary system. So for now, for instance, you may have, let's say, the people, the so-called pastoralists having so many seats in parliament. But in a situation where now powers to shift to parliament through now a parliamentary system, you will see now the larger tribes maneuvering to have more seats in the National Assembly and probably in the Senate. So I doubt as to whether there is usually a good cure for the so-called the need for inclusion.
I don't know if you've had a chance to look at that bill by TRT MP William Kamket Kasait. It is markedly different from the Bomas draft. This one proposes a much weakened president and a much stronger prime minister. But the Bomas draft, I think, had struck a balance. None was too powerful than the other. Don't you think that probably this is a conversation that we need to have now that there's this bill and there's this revisiting of the Bomas draft?
To me, when you have two centers of powers, that is going to create a lot of problems to these countries. You need to ensure power reposes in a certain seat, whether a prime ministerial position or a presidency position. But this idea which you are talking about, where you divide power, where you're not so sure as to which is a more powerful position, to me that is a major cause of various instabilities in various countries. There's what we call immobilism. That is a situation where a government does not function. And a good example was, you recall, the so-called Grand Coalition, which was obtaining in this country between the year 2007 and 2013. That situation where there was a president and there was also what we call a prime minister, and a certain clause was inserted in the repeal constitution, that is Article Section 15A was inserted in the Constitution, which provided that the Prime Minister has some powers of being consulted, and it was not very clear as to you are being consulted on what. So you recall, you would have a situation where the President would try to make a certain, let's say, order. That order would be countermanded by the Prime Minister. So I disagree with that idea.
But you see, that arrangement was to resolve a certain crisis. It's not necessarily a well thought out plan like the ones we are seeing now, because that one was quickly crafted just to resolve a problem at that time, and so probably they had not thought it well out, and therefore the problems that occurred after that. But this one appeared to be something where even experts were called in. Yes, the committee of experts came up with this proposal. Many people were consulted. They agreed on that one. Even forget about this one by William Kamket, but the Bomas draft, this was a well thought out plan that probably Kenya needs this because of this and the other, only to be watered down at the very last minute by a 27-member team.
One, it is you who is talking of sharing powers as between two positions. So when you talk of sharing powers, the bottom line, it means you are not creating certainty as to where power reposes. And that is usually a major problem in politics. When you fail to clearly denote this is the most powerful seat, then you are going to create chaos.
The mistake is that we're talking about power sharing. Probably you should just talk about the power structure, the governance structure, that we have a president, we do have a prime minister. The same way right now we have governors, we do have the president, and they coexist very well. Don't you think that if we were not talking about power sharing, because I think we have this hangover from the Grand Coalition government, which left a very bad taste in our mouths because of how the Prime Minister then and the President related. But don't you think that, yes, if at all you look at it differently, that hybrid system could probably work?
No, it cannot work, because I'm telling you the bottom line should be power must repose in a certain position in a very clear manner. And that position, from where I see it, should be a position that is directly elected by Wananchi, not a position that is directly elected by some parliamentarians. And by the way, I can give you several examples. You recall we used to have people who were called mayors in this country. Then I was a councillor. And I can tell you, mayors used to be elected by councillors. They were not being elected directly by Wananchi. Recall the problems that we used to have during that system. You would find people taking MCAs or councillors then to various hotels, you bribe them, then you get that position. You have a mayor who is not accountable to Wananchi, and we do not want to go back to that situation. The current situation, from where I see it, makes a lot of sense. Here you're talking about a president directly elected by Wananchi. Directly elected by Wananchi, and therefore is accountable to them. So as to that idea that we have experts who were presiding that system, I can tell one of the problems we have in this country is that quite a number of lawyers, they are not really trained in the area of constitutional making in ethnically divided society. It is a new area probably which does not have a lot of experts. And I would urge probably we train more lawyers who are more trained in that area, where people can be able to do what we call comparative analysis between Kenya and other societies which are also have that problem, and we are able to draw lessons from those societies, and from there you can be able to understand whether those positions are logical or not. Sorry to say, but I can tell you these experts, very few probably have masters in constitutional making, and therefore they were just hiding behind the cloak of being experts, but they were merely pushing a certain agenda on behalf of their political persuasions.
Okay. A further read of this headline on the story on page 13 of the Standard reveals other things that were proposed and were what will be part of the draft that we voted for in a referendum, but they were also changed by the 27-member Parliamentary Select Committee. One of them was a proposal to have a 13-member Senate consisting of eminent Kenyans, including retired presidents. And if the proposal had sailed through, retired Presidents Daniel Moi and Mwai Kibaki would be sitting in the Senate today, a 13-member Senate. That would have been the upper house, like the House of Lords in the UK. And more names that were proposed there were William Ole Ntimama, Moody Awori, but that was changed because the Senate was intended to be the upper house. You've worked both in the National Assembly and now the Senate. It is rather a fact that the Senate is much weaker. It cannot be considered the upper house in that bicameral parliament. Do you think that such a proposal would have worked?
No, I disagree. One, I want to dissuade the notion that the current Senate is quite inferior to the National Assembly.
Is it superior?
No, we don't have a house which is superior or inferior under the current
arrangement. But there is to have an upper house and a lower house.
No, I would disagree. Well, fine, we may have what we call a nomenclature. That is, you may name this house upper house, lower house, but you're talking about functionality. And from where I sit, by the way, when you look at various constitutions in the entire world, the powers that reposes currently into the National Assembly, they are rational, and they ought to be retained that way. And those powers, by the way, they obtain in other jurisdictions. A good example is like in America. When you're talking about budget making, it is usually the work of Congress in the United States. And therefore, to me, from where I sit, I don't see any problem with that. You go to the UK, for instance, you will see the so-called lower house. Indeed, it has a lot of powers, notwithstanding being denoted as being a lower house. So, but be that as it may, from where I sit, we senators, we still have power. Probably we need to do more to ensure probably we are felt, but there's no doubt about it, we still have powers. As to this proposal, the reason why I disagree with it, number one, it was being proposed that that house, the so-called Senate, be comprised of people who are not elected. Number two, be comprised of persons who are retirees. People like Mwai Kibaki, people like Moi, people like Ole Ntimama. Those people, surely, they used to go home and probably do other good things, but reserving a house for them where they become like life members, like it is happening in the UK, to me that is wastage of taxpayers' money. I belong to the school of thought that every elected person who exercises power must get mandate directly for Wananchi. It is not out of this where you just meet, you don't have any legitimacy. I disagree with that notion.
Yes.
So therefore I disagree with this proposal, and that shows, by the way, how quite uneducated this so-called committee of experts was.
Yes, this team, the Parliamentary Select Committee, it's not even the committee of experts. The Parliamentary Select Committee now had also scrapped the Senate at that time, and according to this story, it says it's only after opposition leader Raila Odinga and the ODM team threatened to campaign against the document that the Senate was returned. Yes. Do you think that the Senate currently, as currently constituted, is really doing justice to Kenya, given the kind of even the high wage bill? Don't you think the roles that you play right now could just as well be been covered by the National Assembly? After all, you keep overlapping duties. They too can oversight the counties.
No, they can't, because you must have a house whose primary duty is protect the interests of the counties. Because there's always like a push and pull between the national government and the devolved units. So because, for instance, here you are telling the national government to cede some resources to some devolved units. And you'd imagine it is not something, of course, which the national government is quite happy with. And therefore you need a house which have legislative power, which has oversight power to ensure that monies are being sent to the counties, various interests of the counties are being protected at the national level. So therefore, you cannot have a national assembly being given that power or being given that duty to protect the so-called interests of the counties, because first and foremost, the philosophy that underpins National Assembly is to push the agenda of the national government. But for us, our primary existence, what underpins us is to ensure that we protect the interests of the devolved units.
No.
And therefore, we have to be there if at all we want devolution to work. We must be there, for instance, to champion the interests of the people of Ghana at the national level. We must be there to ensure, for instance, money is devolved. We must be there to ensure the counties are working well. Otherwise, if you give that to the National Assembly, it will be a conflicted house. It has some conflict because it is there to ensure the operations of the national government operate well. So therefore, you can't do that. And again, also, you must also compare that with other areas. A good example is South Africa. The South African model, which, by the way, informed our constitution making a lot, is also has that so-called bicameral house. And the so-called upper house, the whole idea is to ensure that the interests of the counties are protected at that level.
Okay. Finally, last week the Budget Committee of the National Assembly included a 2 billion shilling allocation to MPs. Just reading from the headlines, it did not specify senators or members of the National Assembly, just said MPs, to supervise counties. What do you say to that? Because are we certain that that was an allocation to the Senate, or was it members of the National Assembly who want to extend their tentacles to that kind of role?
Well, from where I sit, I have to look at the appropriation and see how it was denoted, the line, what is the details comprised of in that line, for me to make an informed reply to your question. But from where I sit, for us, we senators, we don't want money. We are happy. We are happy with the role that we are doing.
You're the first senator I hear that you're saying you don't need money to perform your duties to supervise counties. There's always been a push to give senators an allocation, at least to facilitate their roles in oversighting and supervising counties.
That money, if at all is going to be allocated, that money, if at all it is going to be allocated, is not going to be given to individual senators. No, it is not going to come to our pockets. It is money which is ideally going to go to a certain office, and that office is the one that is going to do the oversight on behalf of the Senate, not as individuals, as a collegiate institution. So, for instance, Senate may want to hire some auditors, it may want to hire some forensic experts, it may want to hire, for instance, some accountants.
The Auditor General.
Yes, of course. You see, the Auditor General has several inhibitions. Number one, the Auditor General is not sufficiently devolved. For instance, you will find him in Nyeri. He is the auditor in Nyeri. He is the one in charge of the entire so-called former Central Province counties. But if you were to empower Senate, you will have a situation where each and every county is sufficiently audited, each and every project at the grassroots level is sufficiently audited, and there will be some synergy between that house, the so-called Senate, together with the Office of the Auditor General, to ensure the money that is sent to our counties is not lost. So, that money which Senate has been agitated is not like CDF, no. It's not like the so-called women rep fund, no. It is money that is going to be allocated to the Senate as a collegiate system, not for the individual senators.
Wow. Thank you so much, Irungu Kangata, Senator Murang'a County, also the Deputy Majority Whip in the Senate, helping us look at the big headline on the Daily Nation today. Raila team roots for Boma's power sharing formula. And this one on page 13 of the Standard, Moi Kibaki apparently had been listed for Senate. Let's take a break. Pub Breakfast continues.